There was once a story about music so powerful it was able to overcome death and then still failed in the end. Welcome to Music with Morgan, where this week we're looking at 4 different iterations of this tale told across time and mediums in order to understand, is music doing something to the world or just to us? In order to understand this story properly, first we need to back up a few thousand years and look at the beliefs of the Greeks and the Romans about music. For the Greeks, the music was a way of understanding the world and of shaping the world as well. It was an ethical force as well as a cosmic force. Poetry, dance, education, philosophy, and mathematics were all of these things. Music reflected the structure of the universe for them. Pythagoras thought of music as ratios and ordered reality by numbers. Music had the power to order the cosmos. Harmony was literal, cosmic, numerical, universal. They also believed that music shaped the soul as a tool for ethical formation. Different sounds and harmonies could have different effects on the beliefs and the personality in different ways. It had power over nature too. According to some ancient myths, you had the ability to move stones, to charm animals, and so on and so forth with the power of music. It had power inherently in the structure of reality. The Romans took these beliefs and adopted them just a little bit. The Romans viewed music as an aesthetical, social, and rhetorical tool. Music was part of a culture, not necessarily the cosmic order. It was tied to oratory, spectacle, and performance. It was a tool for persuasion, for performance, not necessarily a moral necessity. It had social function and could signify status, enhance speech, and so on. For them, music had power in how it was used by people. Now, to this story. Some of you may be familiar with it, some not. It centers on a man named Orpheus. According to some iterations, he was a demigod, some a mortal, but that's really beside the point. Orpheus was the most powerful musician alive, and on his wedding day to his love Eurydice or Eurydice, she was bitten by a snake and perished before or after they said their vows, depending on the iteration. When she died, Orpheus stopped and mourned his love and then promptly decided he needed to go after her. Sometimes with the help of the immortals, sometimes without, he travels to the underworld, to the domain of Hades, cracks open the gates with the power of his music from his lyre, put a 3-headed dog to sleep, tamed the Furies, the handmaidens of Hades, and was able to persuade the king and queen of the underworld themselves to relinquish her soul back to him, all with the power of his music. There was only one condition. He wasn't allowed to turn around and look at her, to make sure that she was behind him. The power of their love had to be enough to convince him that she was right behind him. They were able to make it to the edge of the underworld, and just as he set foot in the real world, he turned over his shoulder to look at her, and just like that, she was gone. She barely had time to say goodbye. And with that, she died a second time. After this, Orpheus forswears the love of women and ends up being ripped apart by a bunch of women called the Bacchantes, the followers of Dionysus, who wanted revenge for the fact that they were rejected. And in some iterations, it's actually quite comical, despite the dark tone of the story. Now, I'm really interested in 4 different retellings of this tale through music and film. One of them is by Franz Liszt, one is by Beethoven, one is a film from 1959 called Black Orpheus, and the final is what's called a guitar opera by the composer from 2016 by Steve Nuts. The music by Franz Liszt that I'm interested in today is what's called a symphonic poem. All it means is that it's not a traditional form like a sonata or a rondo. This is not a beat for beat retelling of the story I just told you. It really doesn't do much of any depiction at all, except for at the very beginning. And even then, it's very light. Think about this piece of music more as a psychological profile of Orpheus. In Liszt's program notes from the initial performance, he says explicitly that he's not trying to tell the full story of Orpheus, and in fact even enumerates a few ways that he would write the music differently if he was trying to do so. Instead, his program lists a few very specific ideas for the audience to bear in mind while listening to his music. These include an Etruscan vase from the Louvre, representing the first poet-musician, described as, quote, clothed in a starry robe, his forehead bound with a mystically royal fillet, his lips open for the utterance of divine words and songs, and his lyre resounding under the touch of his long and graceful fingers. I fancied I saw the wild beasts of the field standing around him and listening, enraptured to the brutal instincts of man hushed and vanquished. Stones becoming soft, hearts perhaps harder, watered with burning and unwilling tears, the warbling birds and murmuring waters ceasing from their melodies. We also have an example from Liszt in his own writing talking about how Orpheus is not a superhuman being, not a god or a demigod, not a genius who leads humanity one step further on the path to perfection. He is only a husband mourning the loss of his beloved, whose pain is expressed in the most poignant tones. This is a piece of music about Orpheus as a person, as opposed to being about Orpheus in the underworld in Tartarus, which is, quote, too universally recognized and admired as classical for us to add anything in praise here. That is to say that Liszt thinks about this piece, and therefore we should also think about this piece as Orpheus playing music and the universe responding to him, so in awe of the musician's skill that they actually end their own songs in favor of listening to his. I even believe at the end of this piece that the universe, or the orchestra, nature as it may be, is so in awe of Orpheus that they're unable to return to what they were doing before, instead just echoing what Orpheus played. In the orchestration of this piece, there is a double harp, which is super rare. I mean, a student harp these days can go for $15,000, $20,000 easy, and an actual professional harp, $150,000. Again, easy. So just think about how expensive and how extravagant a cost it would have been to have two harps. So having two harps within this piece, A, is extravagant, and B, is definitely meant to be understood as Orpheus himself. The orchestra is nature, the world around him. Go ahead and go listen to this piece in its entirety. It's only about 10, 12 minutes, depending on which recording you choose, in order to get the best experience. But we're going to listen to a few clips here. This piece opens on some horns trumpeting at an interval called a fifth. It's one of the most common intervals that there is in Western music, and this interval, this tone, is meant to herald the start of Orpheus's playing, like drawing attention to what's about to happen. After this, the harps arpeggiate on some notes, like Orpheus is kind of warming up, maybe. I said earlier that this piece really doesn't depict much literally, and this is really the only place where there is depiction, where there is like literal representation of something that someone is doing in the music. There's not really a melody just yet, But nature is about to respond to Orpheus's playing. And it really begins to respond properly to Orpheus's sung thoughts. There's one idea really that's explored at a time by the orchestra, by this piece of music as a whole, and it begins with the ideas played by the harp. So we just listened to the first minute or so of this piece. This idea is explored for almost 3 minutes, actually. And it isn't until the harp introduces a new idea that the orchestra begins to shift as well. The violins play the melody alongside the harps after this shift, and the piece kind of continues in this manner of the harps playing the melody and the orchestra responding. The music is harmonically exploratory, often modulating and not sitting rooted to one spot for very long. So this idea that oh, we're home, that your ear might tell you, it doesn't happen very much. And as I mentioned before, I find the end of this piece to be perhaps the most interesting of all. So after we have this development, this harmony between Orpheus and nature, as it were, the harps stop. The harps do not play for the last 15 measures. And really, all melodic progression ceases as well. Instead, the orchestra lingers on long, slow chords, progressing in a way through the chords that your ear wouldn't really be able to predict. Like I said earlier, I interpret this as nature responding to Orpheus. And after he's finished, they are so in awe that they can't recall what music they were singing before. The music of a babbling brook, of a bird, gone, just in favor of reflecting on this magic that was just made around them. Liszt's Orpheus is not about music taming nature, but it's about music permanently altering nature so that even in his absence, the world continues to sound like Orpheus. Music permanently transforms the world in a structural, irreversible way within the system itself. The orchestra cannot go back. So, in this iteration of Orpheus, music has the kind of structural power that the Greeks would have really aligned with. The next version that I want to talk about is Beethoven. Now, we're going to be discussing Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto, and you could fill several books, honestly, with an analysis of Beethoven's Piano Concerto alone. I would really encourage you to listen to it in its entirety. It's about 45 minutes. But today we are just going to look at the second movement called Andante con moto, and how its structural anomalies help tell its story, and its intertextuality leans on that storytelling. So instead of being a psychological profile as the symphonic poem was, this piece is all about depiction. In the fourth piano concerto, Beethoven doesn't just allude to the Orpheus tale, he stages the tale in its entirety, including the bacchanal I told you about earlier. At the time that Beethoven wrote this piece, there was a cultural obsession with the story of Orpheus. And there's at least 5 different influences on his piano concerto between operas and sets of poetry alone. It's likely that these aren't even the only influences on him, but it's important to know that in the cultural context that this piano concerto was written in, it's steeped in Orpheus. Ovid and Virgil's poetry both show up in different places throughout these 3 movements, and in the section that we're about to look at, there's influence of operas as well. Even if you don't want to listen to the full concerto, that's fine. Go listen to all 7 minutes of this music. I really prefer the Zimmerman recording. You can find it on YouTube. Yeah, Christian Zimmerman is the pianist, directed by Leonard Bernstein. You really can't get any better than that. So, in a concerto, it's important to know that the solo instrument and the orchestra do not play opposite each other as they do in this piece of music. In fact, the piano is usually in a supporting role since it can fill as a continuo function, that is to say, outlining the musical backbone and filling in the chords here and there. So for the form of this piece to be as back and forth as it is, especially at the very beginning, is really strange. And that's because Beethoven is using it to depict. Beethoven is casting Orpheus in the role of the piano, and the Furies, the handmaidens that I mentioned earlier, as the strings. It's not even the full orchestra, it's just the strings. So at the start of this piece, the Furies have been sent to turn Orpheus away with fire and brimstone, but instead they're subdued by his music and his magic that he's able to make. Once he has their ear, once he has calmed them by taking their phrasing their agitated music at the start and continuing to play it, modulating with them, phrasing with them, as you can hear, the orchestra tries to shake off the piano almost, modulating, changing up the phrasing, the emphasis on individual notes within the phrasing, and even by becoming louder, but the piano just repeats what the orchestra says and keeps up with it until he is finally given space to plead his case to the Furies. When he's finally able to do so, the piano details the death of his wife via snakebite in a simple, tense progression featuring abrasive half steps, that little trill in the right hand, followed by 2 upward half steps, and then a downward trill. I think of this little theme as the snake, the serpent, the thing responsible for killing Eurydice. Despite being a piece of music about the best musician alive, there's really no showboating here. There's no wondrous displays of virtuosity, of feats that a normal piano player wouldn't have been able to do. In fact, it's actually been done on repeated occasions that this entire movement is played just by the pianist. If you want a more thorough analysis of this piece of music, go check out a book by Owen Jander. It's an incredible read, even if you're not super into music the way I am. And it's very informative and has more time and space to fill out Orpheus analysis than I do here. But I want to repeat a couple of claims that Jander makes. First of all, the first 38 measures of this piece of music are a nod to another composer's opera about Orpheus and Eurydice. The back and forth kind of argument between the piano and the strings is very reminiscent, as well as some of the dynamic markings, the octaves that the piano and the strings are playing in. These are all things that Gluck's opera does during what's called the infernal scene. It's probably one of the most famous scenes of opera, especially about Orpheus. The strings are playing staccato in the sheet music, and that's, again, something from Gluck. Another really, really interesting moment in this very short movement is at the very end of the piece. There is an arpeggiated chord spread out across 3 octaves, so a very large percentage of the piano, with an appoggiatura on the second note of the scale, under a fermata, and then resolves to the tonic after the pause. Owen Jander calls this a musical translation of Ovid's image. And Orpheus stretched out his arms, eager to clasp her or feel her clasp. Unhappy one, he clasped nothing, but yielded the air. So this is Beethoven's depiction of the moment that Orpheus loses Eurydice a second time. Not necessarily looks over his shoulder at her. There's not really a musical depiction of that, but there is definitely a depiction of the loss. This piece suggests that Orpheus can change behavior, but he can't undo the loss itself. Music can persuade, soften, and even win temporarily, but it cannot completely restore or undo the loss of Eurydice. These 2 moments of empty air and chromatic snakebite reveal the truth. Music may have subdued the underworld, but his wife is still gone. Beethoven lets Orpheus win the argument, but still lose Eurydice. Now, I want to talk about that film that I mentioned. It's called Black Orpheus. It's originally in Portuguese, and I was able to watch it in English online on YouTube.
Now, when talking about Black Orpheus, it's also really important to be talking about bossa nova. Bossa nova is the quieter, more intimate cousin of samba. And these are the 2 types of music in this movie. One is public, one is private. Samba is public, while bossa nova is quiet and private. It's specifically for Orpheus and Eurydice. Bossa nova emerged in the late 1950s Rio de Janeiro, and it took the energy of traditional samba and compressed it into a softer guitar style with sophisticated harmonies. To understand bossa nova, you first have to understand samba. Samba is one of Brazil's defining musical traditions, and it's rooted in Afro-Brazilian culture, and also known for its energetic percussion, layered rhythms, and dance. Traditional samba spreads its rhythm across several percussion instruments, while one of the founding cobras, João Gilberto, condensed many of these rhythmic ideas into a singular guitar part, with the thumb acting like a bass drum and the fingers recreating the syncopated percussion. Bossa Nova also really included a rich harmonic language, major sevenths, ninths, elevenths, chromatic voice leadings, and unexpected modulations. These harmonic colors developed alongside modern jazz, and these two traditions strongly influenced one another. Vocals are typically soft and understated of bossa nova, and conversational almost, as opposed to the dramatic public kind of declarations you might hear in samba. And this reinforces the music's intimate atmosphere. Bossa Nova's international acclaim came with songs like The Girl from Ipanema and This Movie, which really introduced bossa nova to the world. Although the peak of bossa nova was relatively brief, it permanently changed Brazilian popular music and became one of the country's most influential musical exports.
In this movie, it's set in Brazil. It's during Carnaval, one of the biggest, craziest parties of the year every year. And it features Orpheus's music that he plays privately for Eurydice. So you already at the start of this film, you have a contrast between the public and the private, between music for the masses and music for an individual. Within this movie, you do still have discussion of harnessing nature. Orpheus says he plays music at night or very early in the morning to make the sun rise. So there is still this idea that nature can be affected by music in the film itself. But this retelling is a little bit different than some of the other retellings we've been talking about. Not only is it a visual medium, it's also tweaked. So at the start of the film, Orpheus knows this girl named Mia and they're applying for a license to get married. But you can kind of tell that Orpheus isn't really taking it seriously. And later he meets Eurydice and he makes a joke about it. Oh, Orpheus loves Eurydice, everyone knows. They share some time together, he shares his music, and after these very private and intimate moments, they go off into Carnival. He has to hide to wear her cousin's costume instead of a costume that she could have made last second or something, because that girl that Orpheus was with at the start, Mia, is very jealous and doesn't want him near other women because, that's her man. The music of Carnival is fiery and infectious. It's deep and it makes you want to move your body. That's because it's related to samba and Carnival itself. Carnival is about joy is fleeting and let's celebrate right now. At least in this film. This film is perceived as problematic in Brazil, and I have a very privileged position to be able to say, well, I really liked this movie just because of the story that it told. Once you start looking at some of the ways that it depicts the Brazilian people and just kind of the larger messages, it does get messy and it does get problematic, and I want to acknowledge that. But that's also really not what we're interested in here. We're interested in the music. Carnival is about joyous fleeting. Carnival is not about you and me and shared intimate moments together. It's about everyone together in community. You get call and response within the music. You get repeated hooks, drums that never cease, rhythms that pull bodies into sync. The goal here is not to express individuality, it's to erase individuality and be a part of the group. I mentioned earlier that Eurydice wears a costume, and not only are these costumes elaborate, but they erase part of the identity in the movie. Several of them are purple and gold, these kind of royalty colors that everyone wears because at least for a day during Carnival, everyone can be royalty. It erases the identity. You hear some of this Carnival music at the opening of the film, and like I said, it's very fiery, it's infectious, it makes your body want to move, but it's not intimate Orpheus's music that he plays for Eurydice is very intimate. And the piece that I'm really interested in discussing is called O Nosso Amor.
La la da The sun rising out of the sea is bringing my love back to me. Its rays will warm her sleeping head and form a halo round her bed, and she will open her eyes and call to me. I'll play my guitar while she sleeps to sweeten the slumber she keeps. And as I play, her voice will say, I love you. My lips are yours. Those lips I desire set my heart afire, away with the night rise, oh sun.
O Nosso Amor is about our love. That's the literal translation of the title. It's Orpheus talking to Eurydice directly about their love, about their future. It's meaningful, intimate, and directed. The Carnival music is public, collective, sensory, and even overwhelming. Carnival music isn't about telling a story, it's about creating a moment where everyone shares the same feeling, knowing that it won't last. So Orpheus and Eurydice go to Carnival together, and they dance together, they have fun, but there's this lurking, sinking feeling that Eurydice has that she's about to die. She's being pursued during this film by a man in a bone mask, and obviously this is meant to be understood as death. So she slips away during Carnival because she's afraid, and ultimately meets her fate because the masked man finds her. You could even argue that Orpheus causes her death by flicking on the electricity while she's holding on to a live wire, but he didn't know that. So after she dies, he seeks out a religious house and is able to briefly make contact with her again through the power of music.
Where is he? Where is he?
No, don't turn around, or you will never see me again.
I hear your voice, Eurydice.
I am coming to you, Orpheus. Do you love me enough to never to see me again? To only hear my voice?
I love you, Eurydice. I must see you once more. Just put my arms around you. Come back to me. I just want to hold you once more.
No! You will lose me, Orpheus.
Why can't I turn? Why mustn't I see you?
No!
I have to see you.
You will lose me, Orpheus.
Hurry!
You have lost me now. Goodbye, Orpheus.
No! You're lying! Why did you do this to me? You are lying!
Be calm, Orpheus.
You're a liar!
Don't leave yet, Orpheus.
But he's kicked out. It's not his religious house. He can't follow the rules and he doesn't belong there. And this very much parallels the idea of Orpheus being in the underworld and failing a test in the underworld. At the end of the movie, Orpheus is carrying Eurydice's body back presumably to his house so he can mourn her, and trips on a rock and they both fall over the cliff and he dies. But the two little boys that he was speaking to earlier in the film pick up his guitar and play his music as the sun rises. The tragedy of Black Orpheus is not that music fails, it's that it can only work under conditions that the world cannot sustain. The world itself has not changed, but new performers of the same illusion have taken up the mantle. The world sounds like Orpheus, even though Orpheus is dead, because someone new is playing his music. Music can be passed on, beauty isn't extinguished, but the world is still chaotic. Love is still fragile, and death still wins. The final piece of music that I want to discuss today is the most modern of all. It's what's called a guitar opera by Steve Knutson. It's a fully staged Orpheus narrative packaged as a guitar opera. It's about an hour of guitar and percussion on stage, accompanied by some projections to keep the audience's mind focused on a feeling or a mindset. There is a track list, and these tracks do enumerate explicitly Orpheus's journey that we've talked about. However, there isn't a very clear narrator as there is in Beethoven's piano concerto, and there's not literal depiction work being done as there is in Beethoven or even a little bit in Liszt. More or less, it's an hour, a little bit over an hour of almost completely unbroken music. In Act 1, called Super Terram, Orpheus is established as a cowboy. That's what the first track is called. The snakebite explicitly occurs, and the first lament, as well as Orpheus's decision to go pursue his wife. In Act 2, Subterra, it features his descent into the underworld, the strangeness of his environment, and then his plea to the gods and his ultimate failure to abide by the contract. In Act 3, Superterram, this features another lament and Orpheus's destruction by a mob by the Bacchantes. Mackie, the composer, gives us the full myth, but packaged in a modern way, post the Second Viennese School, post-tonal music. And this creates some chaotic sounds at times. So Mackie composes with not one but two different guitars. And these are different setups, different timbres, different tunings even. They have different physical characteristics, different sustaining characteristics. And so instead of one stable instrument, one voice, you get a shifting identity of sound. In earlier Orpheus traditions like the ones we've looked at, you have one instrument for one voice. You have the lyre, the piano, the harps, but that's still really one instrument. The power of Orpheus in those depend on one voice, one coherent, continuous voice. With multiple guitars creates a fractured voice of Orpheus. There's no single stable sonic identity. And even these are treated differently. They function differently. Guitar 1, the one that Orpheus, the cowboy, begins with, the one that is perhaps used the most, is closer to singing. It's closer to continuity. And this is where you hear the traditional Orpheus trying to exist. But the second guitar is more percussive, more processed, more attacked even. There's places where he's tapping on it, where he's making more noise with it, where there's unstable articulation. And this is the breakdown of Orpheus's voice. These aren't just two different sounds, they're different possibilities of Orpheus's voice. So in Beethoven and Liszt, the power depended on consistency and recognizability, continuity. But in Mackie, when the guitar changes, the authority of the voice changes. When the voice changes, the power becomes unstable. Orpheus is no longer an agent, but he becomes a series of attempts to revive his lost love. Lyre music corresponds pretty directly with some of the other musical moments that we've looked at. Andante con moto, an operatic scene that Beethoven was inspired by, and the Orpheus singing to the dead moment from Black Orpheus. It restores Orpheus to his mythic status, at least temporarily, as the guitar is lyrical and centered. And this is pretty much as close to we get as a coherent Orpheus voice. In Mackie's composition, the environment is unstable and there's no clear persuaded moment. There's no clear victory. The world remains alien and even indifferent to his plight. There's no obvious submission of the underworld, just Orpheus's plea. It's this moment, this piece sits in power, in between power and failure. The idea of Orpheus still exists in lyre music, but the effectiveness is unclear at best. One of the very next tracks is called The Look, and this track destroys the idea of Orpheus existing. This moment is his failure explicitly, and this is really something that the other two strictly musical pieces of work really haven't touched on. The musical world itself doesn't support Orpheus, and the voice doesn't operate within a responsive system, regardless of if that voice is voice, piano, harp, or guitar. Orpheus loses the conditions that make Eurydice attainable in the first place. Mackie has music attempt the same myth, but the system itself won't cooperate. By calling this track The Look, Mackie removes ambiguity. The failure isn't just implied, but staged. And what collapses is the musical logic that made Orpheus's voice effective to begin with. With this look, he loses the world that would have let him keep her. At its core, the Orpheus myth asks a simple but impossible question. Can music change reality? And that question isn't just poetic, it comes out of ancient belief directly. For the Greeks, music wasn't just expressive, it was structural and tied to mathematics, to the order of the cosmos or the shaping of the soul. So the idea that Orpheus could move stones and persuade death wasn't fantasy. It was an extension of what music was. By the time you get to the Romans, that belief shifts. Music is still powerful, but now it's understood more as rhetorical. It persuades, it moves audiences, it enhances speech. So Orpheus becomes less a cosmic force and more of the ultimate persuader. Everything that we've looked at, all of this music sits somewhere between these two poles. For example, in the Piano Concerto No. 4, music still believes in its own power. The piano in Andante con moto persuades the orchestra. The system responds, but then something slips. Chromaticism slips in, instability creeps in, and by the end, the piano is left reaching into emptiness. So there, music can change behavior, but it can't undo loss. In Liszt's symphonic poem, the hesitation disappears. The harps don't just persuade, they transform. The orchestra becomes a part of Orpheus almost. And even after he stops playing, the world still sounds like him. Here, music doesn't just act on reality, it rewrites it. In Black Orpheus, that belief collapses. Music still works, but only in private, fragile spaces. In Onoso Amor, it creates a world that feels complete, at least for a moment. But outside that space, in the chaos of Carnaval, it can't hold. And when Eurydice dies, the music can reach her, but it can't keep her. The world doesn't change, the moment just ends. And finally, in Orpheus Unsung, we get the full myth intact, but stripped of certainty. In lyre music, Orpheus still sings. The attempt is real. But then comes the look. And unlike Beethoven, that failure isn't implied. It's named and performed. What collapses isn't the relationship, it's the system that made the song matter at all. So across all of these, we can hear a shift from music as cosmic force to persuasion, to fragile experience, to an uncertain attempt. And that brings us back to the question, what power do we believe music has and what happens when it fails? Maybe the answer is this: music can still move us, create connection. It can make us believe briefly that something can be held on to. But when it's failed, what is revealed isn't silence. It's the limit of where that power lies. Not in the world, but in us.